Good morning, Michael. Good morning, Tyke.
Good morning.
Good morning, young adults and anyone else that may be listening. Welcome to episode 1. I guess it's titled The Talk Part 1.
That it is, because that's the series that we're in.
Yeah,
Yes.
It was very, very good last night. I'm excited to dive into this.
We started the talk series last night, and last night Pastor Michael started with lust. Da da da.
And sexual...
Immorality.
Yeah, I can't say that.
I didn't like that you stared at me after you said it. It was just, it put me in a
Uncomfortable state of mind.
Yeah. For those of you that aren't aware, The Talk is a message series that we're doing currently in our young adult services that's going to deal with everything from relationships and healthy boundaries within those relationships. We did talk this past Sunday about lust and sexual immorality and things like that. And we know that those can be uncomfortable topics for people. We know that sometimes, especially in church, that's hard to talk about, but that makes it even more necessary for us to be able to talk about those things, because one of the things that matters a lot to us and our team with the young adults is making sure that we are engaging you on topics that affect your life right now.
Yeah.
That are what you're dealing with right now. And sexuality and all those things, there's so much stuff about it in the media. There's so much stuff about it all over the world. That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to talk about that. And so that's these first few episodes of the podcast, these next few weeks at Young Adults, that's what we're going to be diving into. And this past Sunday, we did have a message about sexual immorality and how it affects our lives, how it affects our relationship with God, and what it can do if we don't get those things in check.
Yeah, so just to start off with kind of how you did last night, just because if anyone's new and doesn't know what it actually means, lust is a sexual desire or a craving, and sexual
Immorality.
is sexual activity outside of a biblical marriage. And that nowadays is very important that you threw the word in biblical marriage, because I feel like a long time ago you could have just said marriage and everybody, that just made sense.
Yeah.
But now with all the different...
I mean, anyone can be ordained to officiate a wedding nowadays. All you got to do is do an online course for like an hour.
Yeah. And there's so many distortions out there of what marriage is.
Yeah.
And when we say biblically defined marriage, that is in no way meant to hurt or offend anybody, but we do believe and understand that God designed marriage with a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
God designed marriage for a reason. There's a reason that it is laid out the way that it is. And his desire is for a man and a woman to come together, become one flesh, as the Bible says.
Yeah.
And so we have to define that clearly, but also that's in an effort to help and to guide as our young adults. Like I said this past Sunday, we have people in our ministry that are in every walk of life, as far as some are single, some are dating, some are engaged, some are married with children, and we want to be able to engage people and to help them to engage them in life and to help no matter where you're at. And to do that, we have to be able to define clearly where we're at, what we believe, and how those beliefs guide and shape our lives.
That's good. You talked about man and wife coming together, being one flesh. Last night you went into that, and you said in your message that sex is the thing that binds man and woman together. And then you talked about the covenant of marriage. Do you want to go into that anymore? Because I had never heard that. I very much subscribe to what you said at the beginning of your message, where no one teaches about lust, or churches shy away from teaching about lust and sexual immorality.
Let me touch on that really quick before he answers that, because I kind of have the same. My brain went, you know how it does. It went away.
I know.
So I'm just gonna say this, and I promise it's gonna lead back to that. So bear with me, okay?
We're with you, Grace.
So in Genesis 2, you read, a couple of verses there, but it basically talks about how the Lord took one of Adam's ribs and created Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And to sum all that up, the relationship was happening in its proper context, which was in the will of God, which is why they were naked together and did not feel ashamed, or didn't even notice, right?
Yeah.
Like it was natural, it was normal, because it was in the proper context, it was in the will of God. Here's how my brain goes crazy. And then I just thought about like Jesus dying for us, because that's huge.
Yeah, big deal.
So I wrote down like my exact train of thought, and there's two different things. So the first one was Jesus sacrificed his body for us. So why can't we sacrifice ours until marriage? Right. And then my brain was thinking about how, even if you've already messed that up, right, it doesn't mean you can't start again like today.
Yeah.
You can't start now. I think, to go personal, that was difficult for me. I didn't understand the fact that Jesus died for me, sacrificed his body for me, and I should do the exact same thing for him until I'm married. I looked at it as like, my parents are really hard on, my family's really hard on me on this. I'm not supposed to do this. It's another rule. Just like I'm not supposed to go drink, or I'm not supposed to go party. Sex, in my mind, was the same thing, right? Like, yes, it's a sin, but so is all those things.
Yeah.
Right? It never made sense to me that this was the first sin, or one of the only sins, I think, as you said last night. Help me word this, towards your...
It's a sin against
Body.
your
against
own
your own body,
Yeah.
yeah. So basically what I wrote down was, it felt like I was always pressured into sex being wrong. It is a sin, and I think I realized that. But it seemed that growing up, it was just another rule, maybe a more serious rule, but still just a rule. What I wish I comprehended was Christ loves us so much that he sacrificed his own son's body for us, that he owns our body, and he is part of us. And what we do with our own body, we are also doing unto God. So I think I wish I would have just been able at a younger age to comprehend, why do I not do this?
Right.
Not necessarily, hey, you shouldn't do this.
Right. And that's that is also one of the standpoints we tried to come from on Sunday night.
Right.
Was a couple of things. One, I had to acknowledge that everybody in this room has a different experience with what this is. Because one thing I don't want is for someone who has crossed those boundaries and done those things outside of biblical marriage, I don't want them to feel like I'm saying you're a lost cause. This ship has already sailed for you. I'm not really talking to you right now. I don't want that. I want them to understand, like you said, I messed this up, or I did this and I shouldn't have, or I fell into this situation, but I can turn around today. I can start fresh today. I can start over today. But also, I had to acknowledge that a lot of times what we see in church culture is not necessarily an education on what sex is and what it means and what God designed it for, and more of a, this is bad, stay away from it. This is bad, stay away from it. This is bad, stay away from it. And that's all you kind of get drilled into you, especially as a kid. And then what happens is we have a bunch of adults that grow up and don't really have a proper understanding of the context that sex is meant for. And one of the things we discussed Sunday night is sex, in and of itself, that is a good thing. It is. God gave us that for a reason. It is a good gift that came from a perfect Father who loves us. But that gift is meant to be used in a specific, certain context. It is a part of the covenant of marriage. And when we operate outside of that covenant, we are sinning against our own bodies. We're sinning against God. And we have to understand that our bodies were made by God. The Bible calls us his masterpiece. He created us. He put us together. So our bodies don't even belong to us. This thing's on loan, you know? And it's not my job to decide what's proper for it, what's proper use for it. That's biblically defined.
Right.
I have to look at God and I have to follow what his word says. And if his word says this is what this is designed for, who am I to go against that? And so that's really the angle we try to take on it, is just from a biblical perspective. This is what the Bible says, and sex is not a bad thing. It is not something that needs to be taboo in church. It is not something that needs to be shied away from. It's something that needs to be properly understood.
That reminds me of something our lead pastor says a lot, or at least in the internship, he says quite a bit. The Lord's the only one that can create. The only thing the devil can do is pervert.
Exactly.
So like sex was created biblically, and the devil has obviously perverted that. If you just look in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would consider myself a Christian my entire life, and there were times when I was in high school and I'd be doing too much with my girlfriend that I would feel conviction, although I wasn't necessarily in church. I think it's very interesting that I still felt that, because I want to say that people that are in the world, not that they don't, Jesus, they don't accept Jesus as their savior. I would say that they don't feel conviction over anything. Like they can go and have sex with their girlfriend and they're just fine with it. Or they can go and have sex with their boyfriend and they're just fine with it. But I wonder if the perversion, if the enemy is still perverting sex for them, or if that's just normal, or if the enemy perverted sex for specifically just for Christians. Like if sex is only perverted for Christians because sex is only for marriage. So people that are away from God.
I think that, and I think I understand where you're coming from, but I think that we are all subject to the, not to use a super churchy term here, but the spiritual warfare that goes on. Because, the Bible tells us that, God desires that none should perish, right? Like, and so the devil, the enemy, wants us all to lose. And so I think that we are all subject to that tension. We're all subject to those forces tugging at us. But your relationship with God, or lack thereof,
causes that conviction.
Yeah, because
you're only convicted because of God, and
it's like right now. I know we're using microphones so the audience can hear us, but I can hear you guys fine because I'm sitting right next to you.
Yep.
If I were on the other side of this, right now we're in the worship center of our church. If I was on the other side of the room, I wouldn't be able to hear you guys as well because there's a distance created there.
Yeah.
Or if I went out into the lobby, I wouldn't be able to hear you guys at all because of the distance and the barriers between where I am and where you are. And so I think that it's not necessarily that those things, those voices or whatever you want to call them, that conviction, and it's not that it doesn't exist in the life of an unbeliever. I would say that there's so much distance and there's so many barriers that they might not be able to hear it or feel it. And the closer that you get to God, the more you can hear his voice. When you're in closer proximity to someone, you can hear them better. And so the reason that you were able, I think, to still feel that and hear that is because even if you would call yourself, you weren't very much in church at that point, you still knew who God was and you still cared about that. You still cared about that relationship, at least to some degree in your life. And so I think there was still that enough proximity for you to be able to hear that.
Yeah.
Here's a very deep turn.
Okay.
It wasn't covered last night. It could very well be covered in the next couple of weeks. I don't know. But touch on, because maybe I'm the only one in the world, but I doubt it. It's very possible, though, I guess.
It's possible.
How sex before marriage can affect sex in marriage.
Wow. Yeah. So I think that there's several things, and I probably will miss something because there's a lot of different there's a lot of
Right.
different ways
I
you can
can
go
just say
that,
for
but
me, in the very beginning of marriage, it was very difficult. It was very weird. It was very uncomfortable. I think because in my mind, I was like, oh well, when I'm married, it's gonna be even better. Or
yeah.
but then it's just like, oh, it's the same thing. Or I don't know what it was. Or I mean, we're good now. I'm just saying like it. I can't even explain it.
I think to some degree when you are not only talking about sexual activity in and of itself here, but even like because this past Sunday we talked a little bit about just lust in general and those desires, and leaving those desires unchecked can lead to many things like watching things or looking at pictures of things that aren't of God, not what you should be doing, and all of that stuff. I think distorts your view and your expectations of sex because those things kind of create this world where you think it's supposed to look this way or be this way, and it is all very self-serving, and it's all very focused on you and your desires and all those things, and sex is not it's not supposed to be all just wrapped up in you. It's you and your partner. It is an act unto the Lord. It is part of your biblically defined marriage. That it goes the connection, and this is goes back even to more of what the point I was making Sunday night, and how marriage needs to be in, or sex needs to be in that context. Um, it's about the connection of sex is so much more than the physical.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that it's so distorted outside of marriage is because it is totally and completely on you. You're doing that because you want to do that, because you have the desire to do that, and that's going to bring you some type of pleasure or what you think is joy in the moment. Sex is not ultimately about that. It is not just I'm not just it's not just about what you want. It's not just about pleasing this desire. It is an expression of love and commitment and covenant. And so I think that when you go into your marriage relationship and you have those distortions to deal with, that's something you have to work through because you never had a proper understanding of what sex is and what it is supposed to be within your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Something that kind of helped me, excuse me, something that kind of helped me is which I think we've talked about. But the devil wants to get you in bed as much as possible before you're married, and when you're married, he wants to get you out of bed as much as possible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? Because before marriage, it's obviously wrong.
Yeah.
So he's going to do everything he can to get you in bed with a woman. And when you are married, it's biblical now, right? So it's like I'm going to get you out of bed as
Yeah,
much
so-
as possible.
So he doesn't want
So
you
once,
to.
yeah. So once I had overcome that thought of just it's not me and it's not her. It's just the devil trying to distract me from what this is because
Yeah.
it's right now. Like I can do this now,
Yeah.
and I just had to overcome that mentally.
Because marriage is and the family in general, I mean, it's such a blessing in our lives, and it's something that God ordained and God structured the way He has for a reason. And the enemy is going to do what he can to attack that. I think a lot of the distortions and things that we talked about in the world that are going on with sexuality and all those things, a lot of that is an attack on the family, trying to rip away at the structure of what the family is. And again, that's why it's important for us in a setting like this, in a setting like a church service or a small group or whatever, to be able to discuss these things, because especially as men, it starts with us in our homes. I'm the priest of my home. You're the priest of your homes.
Yep.
So especially Grayson, you have a child. Um, we will have children at some point, presumably all of us. So it's our job to teach those children. And, for our young adults, like I said, some of them are single, some of them are married, whatever. They're all in between. But regardless of what stage they are in life, they need to understand these topics and how God feels about them, because there's so many opinions flying around. And if you don't have a good foundation in yourself, those opinions can start to affect you.
Near the end of your message, you went into a portion where you were talking about loneliness and how loneliness can influence making these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go into that anymore?
Yeah, for sure, man. I think that's something that sometimes we will try to treat a problem, but we are not really getting to the root. We're treating symptoms,
Yeah,
and not the actual issue. And there's a lot of things that go into when you're struggling with sexual sin. Some of it, like I said, is just your own fleshly desires. We all have that. We all have to wrestle with that.
mm-hmm.
But I think that there's a large portion of it, and I've seen this a lot in young adults and teenagers. It is easier to get pressured into something or to fall into a certain temptation when you are just lonely, because you just want someone to care. You just want someone to be there with you, be there for you. And so I see a lot of times young women or young men rushing into a relationship, and they might not even like this person.
Yeah.
They might not even have they just don't want to be alone. They see everyone else having great relationships. They see everyone else's Facebook posts and Instagram posts, National Boyfriend Day, National Girlfriend Day. They don't.
I'll tell you this. The ones that I always think are the happiest and are all over social media are the ones that always fail. Like something always happens. It's crazy. Even when I was growing up, one of my best friends, I was just like, I wish my family was like this, right? Like my mom, single mom, I'd see his mom, I'd see his dad, and I was just like, this is amazing. Like I wish I had this. He had an older brother, and I was like, that's so cool. Boom, family fell apart. They got a divorce. Like it was crazy, and I was just like, you never know the problems on the inside.
Yeah, like I don't know if I would say always, because people post their families on social media, but I do think you're touching on a great point there, is that when we see these highlights on social media,
Yep.
you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And so many times we compare our entire lives to somebody else's highlights. And I think that is part of what causes people to rush into things they shouldn't, because they are lonely and because they feel like everybody else has this. And so a lot of times those relationships wind up moving faster than they should, and winding up doing things within those relationships that they shouldn't do, but it's because they don't want to lose that relationship. They feel like if they say no, if they, deprive that person of that, then that person's going to leave, and they aren't comfortable enough with themselves to think about the idea of that person leaving. And so that's why I kind of went into that Sunday night, is because I do think that is a huge reason why some of this happens in relationships, especially with young people. It does come from that pit of loneliness, and like I said in the message, you're really just trying to fill a void. You are trying to fill a void that is not meant for that to fill.
Yeah.
The only thing that's supposed to fit there, the reason you feel that loneliness, is because your heart's crying out for God.
Yeah.
And you just don't know it. That's the thing that's missing. That's the thing you don't have enough of. And I think a lot of addictions or temptations we give into, whether it be drugs, alcohol, a lot of those things stem from that.
Yeah.
And so if we can learn to identify that in our lives and realize, like, I know what this means. I know what these feelings mean,
Mm-hmm.
and deal with those in a healthy way. I think that we would be able to steer ourselves away from making those poor choices.
Yeah. I know that for me, when I am alone, and I wouldn't consider myself lonely when I'm alone, but when I am alone, say at home by myself, that is when it is easiest for me to give into temptation,
Mm.
regardless of what it is. Because there's nothing there to distract me. And two, there's no one there to keep me accountable.
Yep.
I say there's no one there. I still get conviction, of course, because I get tempted. But so I've been told in my life to just try to stay busy. And yes, that's good. But at some point I'm gonna run out of energy, I'm gonna run out of steam, and I'm going to have to take a break.
Mm.
Then when I take a break, I'm right back into that problem without properly fixing it. And so staying busy, although yes, it can be good, I think it's wrong. I
Yeah.
think telling someone to stay busy to help deny the temptation is wrong, because it at some point you're going to get back to not being busy. You're
Yeah.
going to have to get back to not being busy.
And I love that you touched on the fact that when you're by yourself, there's no one there to keep you accountable. That's something that we didn't talk about a ton on Sunday night, but it is a huge portion of how this. And I know we're gonna talk about it more as the series goes on, but I just wanted to say something about it here. Like, you have to have accountability in your life. With anything like this or any temptation that you're trying to face, that's one of the first questions I ask people when they come to me and they say, like, hey, I'm dealing with this, I'm struggling with this, I haven't been able to kick this habit, this thing. Like, do you have accountability? Is
Mm-hmm.
there someone there? Is there someone that is going to check up on you? And I say this, I want to say this carefully because I know relationship matters. But one thing that I see people do a lot is pick like their best friend that's not gonna they pick a
Yep.
friend they know is not going to really dig into their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Someone they know they can just, if the person does ask, they can just be like, oh no, I'm good. And then we pick somebody, get somebody in your life that is invested and that is committed to following up with you and making sure that things are okay.
Yeah.
And then in those moments where that temptation rises, you also have to be honest.
Yep.
And you also have to have the wisdom and the maturity to be able to reach out at times and say, "Hey, Grayson, Tyke, I'm struggling.
Mm-hmm.
This is a day where I am really struggling," and that person can encourage you and help you. Accountability, even with our devices, our phones, our iPads, our computers, have people that have your password just for,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, just to make sure. Like, I my I'm comfortable in saying my wife has my passwords to everything.
Mm-hmm.
To everything. At any point. She could look at anything. Not that, it's just not like she's looking at my life with a magnifying glass or anything like that, but to me it's just, that's the trust level in our relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
that, to me, just keeps me accountable in the case that even if I did struggle or have a, man, I want to look at such and such,
Yeah.
I know that my wife can see that at any point,
Mm-hmm.
and I would never want to hurt her in that way too. And that's another, if you are in a relationship or a marriage, man, you also have to think about that person,
Yep.
and what that means for them and how that can affect them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's roughly how you wrapped up your message last night, talking about loneliness. Um, we'll be going into a message this week about boundaries.
Hmm.
This coming week about boundaries. Um, that'll be interesting. We've got 3 more weeks left in this message series. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah,
It's gonna be good.
it's gonna be good.
Well, that's all I have for you guys. Got anything else?
Is there anything, any way you would like to wrap up the message similar to how you did it on Sunday, different than how you did it on Sunday? Is there anything that you would like to let the viewers go into
Is this like a
the
look
rest
into
of
the
their
camera
week with?
thing?
Oh, this is like a
Look right
zooming in
forward.
on your mouth, like just.
If that made you struggle, go to church.
Well, there you go.
So listen, guys, like we've been talking about, we know that these topics are difficult, and we know that these are real struggles that people handle and people go through. And we want you to know that, first of all, Jesus loves you. He loves you so much. And he values you and cares about you so much. Regardless of where you fall on the spectrum of what you've done, I just want you to know that your story's not over, that the Lord cares about you. He has a plan and a hope and a destiny for your life. If these are things that you've been struggling with lust, with sexual immorality, I would just encourage you, reach out to somebody, reach out to one of our leaders, one of our young adult leaders, myself. We would love to help you in any way that we can, and also have the wisdom and the maturity to begin to set up accountability in your life, whatever that looks like for you. Have people that can check on you, that can help you, that are invested in your life. And as we'll talk about next week, set up those boundaries, those healthy boundaries in your life and in your relationship that'll help you live this out the way that the Lord intended. But always know we're here for you. We're praying for you. We love you, and we have your back. We'll see you next week.